Good evening and welcome to Full Stop Recalibration, a roundtable discussion. We are delighted to have you all here tonight. Before we dive into the discussion that awaits us, I would like to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to our guests and generous funders who have made this event possible. First, I want to extend a warm thank you to our distinguished moderator and curator of the exhibition Full Stop, Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz, whose expertise and guidance will undoubtedly enrich our discussion tonight. We are honored to have you with us tonight. I would also like to acknowledge the talented artists who will be sharing their experiences and insights throughout this evening. Tanya Bindra, Samantha Box, Frigillana, Pratya Jankong, Ashley McLean, and Ana Vallejo. Thank you for joining us and for contributing your unique perspectives to this conversation. Before we go on, I would like to thank our funders. Infoco is supported in part with public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, New York State Council on the Arts, with support of Governor Kathy Hochul, and the New York State Legislature, the Mellon Foundation, Bronx Care Health System, the Joy of Giving Something, Ford Foundation, and the Guado Public Arts Fund. Wanda, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you so much for being a powerhouse and helping me get this entire exhibition off the ground. And thank you to Danny Peralta and Focal team. And thank you also for the invitation to be part of this exhibition. This is more than an exhibition for me. This is a homecoming of sorts to be able to come back in service to in Focal to a Bronx-based arts organization, and in service to the next generation of New York-based artists that are coming up and doing amazing work. And so it is a privilege and an honor for me to be able to do this work, but I couldn't have done it without the Infoco team. Y'all make me look great. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us, for those here in the webinar, and certainly, but last and not least, thank you for the 2023 Infoco Artist Fellowship cohort. How y'all doing?
Good.
There you go. Everybody good? All right, so we did it. We've got this amazing exhibition up at Wallworks. Thank you also to Wallworks for hosting us, right? It really has been a treat and a pleasure to learn about your respective practices. And so thank you so much for trusting me. This is an unconventional exhibition, don't you think? Before we jump into like the heavy duty questions, I would love to hear a little bit of feedback. And as you introduce yourselves, just the tiny little kind of blurb about like your entree into work, into art, or what you do. And then I'd love to hear some of your, kind of light feedback on the exhibition, and maybe if it's any, just your thoughts.
All right, I think I can go first.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm Pratya Jankong. I'm a New York-based photographer. I do both commercial and try to do a personal project that try to balance both of them. And about the exhibition, that it's the first time that project that I've been doing for a couple of years that it display physically. So it's very great to see that, and it's good. And I'm really thank you for that opportunity to select the work to be a part of very good program this year. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it looked great. I imagine you said that you had shown it virtually, right? But this is the first time you actually get to put it out into the world this way.
Actually, it's the second time. It's the first time in England, but the time in England, I couldn't go there. So basically, the curator in England, it's a format. The name is a Format Festival 2023. They selected the work to show there in England, but the arrangement of the show is mostly it's a curator in England who did that. But this time, Wanda gave me like the freedom. She's okay, let's do what you want to do, and she gave me the green light, and that the arrangement they did at the show. Yeah, that's just amazing. Yep, thank you.
It looks awesome. It looks awesome. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll go. First off, thank you, everyone from Infoco for this beautiful, being a part of this beautiful exhibition and to put together the show. Wanda, Kim, it was incredible, especially having the conversations with you, Wanda, prior to the build out of the exhibition, and just how open you were to just my perspective and kind of things that I wanted to include in the show, even changing it super close to the opening day. Yeah, it was just really beautiful, the conversations that I had with everyone, even at the opening show. But yeah, I like to start off by saying I'm an artist, I'm an image maker, and I tend to often think about tenderness, identity, community, expression, sensitivity, as focal points and like a guiding light to the work I do, which I feel all calls attention, all those subjects call attention to, and is connected to the realm of healing and creating catharsis in art, in my work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's super evident. I think it adds a really beautiful counterbalance to say, for example, actually to everybody's work, right? That, you know, one of the through lines that I saw, in addition to the work tackling very difficult subjects around race and class and, you know, all the troubling things about from being from the diaspora and living in the United States, but the through line for me was this sort of, you know, this sort of elevation and this lift, right? And I feel like your piece, Ashley, your pieces truly encapsulate, like it put a big red heart around, you know, and I just like, it was like a big, beautiful, intimate one-on-one hug, right? Like there's the kind of warmth and sensitivity that I think it balanced out some of the more you know, difficult work. Not to say your work is not difficult, but I think it acted as a really beautiful counterbalance and a counterbalance to the kind of imagery that we see of ourselves and our friends and brothers and sisters and partners and children out in the world. So yeah, no, you did that.
I think that's the most beautiful thing too about group shows, is that, well, particularly this one, you know, you just mentioned not too long ago, we're all healing or going through some stuff, right? But you know, we tend to just create this bubble mentally and think that we're the only ones going through what we're going through. And, you know, our experiences are unique, but it's beautiful to see and to also be a witness to and learn everyone else's healing journeys, and you know, come into that space with humbleness and respect. It's really beautiful to be shown amongst everyone on this panel and those who aren't. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Next. Thank you. Next.
I can introduce myself. I really love that sentiment, Ashley. It just like reminds me that yes, being in healing means like an identity not cemented in some ways, and I've been thinking about that a lot, just how identity is shaped and formed in community, and how it must be in community. And so yeah, that experience of the exhibition and also being in communication with all of you has been really rewarding. So I'll just also introduce myself. My name is Tanya, and I'm a photographer, documentary photographer, and also work as a film producer and director. My background is in photojournalism. I started working as a news photographer for the Associated Press as a stringer, covering news in West Africa, and then working more regionally and internationally covering conflict and post-conflict stories, and also migration, displacement. And I can talk a little bit about this later, but there was a sort of natural evolution for me away from the sort of pacing of news photography, to something that maybe is a little bit more healing for me and for the people that I'm, you know, working with. So a lot of my work today is is still kind of grappling with those same themes, but I think also focusing more on the kind of culture and spirituality.
It's interesting because your aesthetic absolutely reads as a documentary photographer for the press, right? Like there's that quick eye, there's the have to, be quick on your feet. Eye is constantly searching for that moment, and it feels like a million shutter stops, right? Like, or shutter clicks, I should say, for that moment. And that definitely translates into something kind of, it's interesting because that frenetic, gotta catch it now. I think I have an 8-year-old son, so I'm all of a sudden immediately went to Pokemon. I said, gotta catch him on. I went right to Pokemon. But this sort of like quick, you have to be on, right? Which requires an amazing level of presence, right? Be able to be there and see it and know that this is the image that will talk about this thing, and bringing that into this particular practice. Can you share just a tiny bit about how that decision making makes its way into your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a bit difficult for me to sort of undo that training as a news photographer, especially when we're talking about the pacing and we're talking about, stories also that are about underrepresented communities. And so there was like a real desire on my part to go slower, to try to get to some emotional truth that, I mean, and also there's the main thing for me was working as a news photographer. I just didn't have control over the narratives of my photos anymore, especially going out on the wire, like, the Times is running your photo and they're not running a caption. So I just kind of, it's still something that I'm trying to unlearn in some ways. Like like I started working more with film, and that was something that helped me kind of slow down but I still do have an appreciation for news photography in general. And, but I think I just, I needed something slower.
Yeah, I think, and I'm trained as an illustrator, even though I've done so many other mediums. I think that initial training is also that initial love, right? There's something that brings you to that what took you to undergraduate class? What was that thing that brought you? So for me, it was illustration. For you, you were doing like that deep training as a documentary photographer for the news. It's interesting to see what sticks and what you let go. And I think for each one of you, I would love at some point, maybe we can kind of tap into that, like the thing that you do for a living, or how photography has come into your main income source, but then also like, what are the things, or training, what is the thing that stays and what fell away? So I don't know who else wants to jump in and pick up that. I know I didn't write that question out to you before, but I just was like, we should talk about what stays and what we let go, and watching also like how things kind of, we circle back to that training again and again and again. Who wants a bite at that?
I guess I could jump in on that.
I was looking at your really hard.
Well, I think thank you first of all for having me, and for this opportunity. It's really been a pleasure exhibiting with all of you and being in conversation with all of you. My name is Frigillana. I'm an artist working with photography and image archives. Much of my work deals with the Filipinx diaspora and themes of labor, faith, memory, home, family, as it relates to that diaspora. And I primarily work with books. That's kind of like my medium. So like when I think of, your question of, what stays, I really think of like time. I think of like when what Tanya was saying about slowness. That's something that really resonates with me, because with my practice, I really have like time and slowness is so integral to how I make the work. And it's so important it's such an important element in how the work is shaped, I think. And I think it's with photography for me, it can often be such an isolating experience, the process of creating work. And I think having like this opportunity to exhibit with other people and to be in conversation with other artists, it feels in a way so refreshing, because you spend so much time, often, like, at least with what I do, like sometimes it could be years working on a single project. And it feels isolating sometimes and lonely, that endeavor of creating, and to have it be in conversation with other artists just feels really refreshing to me.
So, what is it? What do you think fell away in your training, and what have you kept?
I think that's something that's constantly changing. I mean, I think what I always try to keep in terms of how I photograph, if that's what you're asking for, is my sensitivity to how I look at things. And I think for me, that's the most important thing, because at least with the way I think of imagery is being something that's very malleable, and depending on the context that you display imagery, so many meanings and layers can be derived from how you read these images. So I think the sensitivity, how I think about images, is something that has to remain. It doesn't matter what project I'm doing. I think for me, the curiosity has to remain. That's the most important thing. In regards to catharsis, I do something because I'm really curious about it, and it's like an itch that I have to scratch. And the process of working through it is the catharsis for me.
Yeah, I think that's certainly evident in your practice, and also your attention to detail, right? So when coming upon your work, what I found very enticing, that's not right, that's not quite the right word, was the slowness that is evident in the research, right? So it's clear that your work is based in this sort of archival research, right? And you give us the evidence, you give us these images that you found in Library of Congress, you give us, but you also give us this sort of slowness in the documenting of your family and the looking at so there's that there it's not just that you kind of rummaged around and grabbed some things and slapped the show together. Like there's a reverence, right? And there's a reverence not just for the subject, but also for the and a respect for slowness. And it shows that there's a very careful meditation on the subject. And not to say that y'all are just reckless out here, just out wild in the streets. Each one of you are obviously very careful, cautious, and mindful of your practice. That's across the board. But I think in the actual using of these archival images, I think that's something it's very clearly evident, and attracts you from across the room, and then makes you hang out for a while. And it's very seductive from across the room, but then you stay, and it's mindful and so I think you very effectively do that, and that's thank you for that. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm gonna start calling out names. We've got two artists left. Who's it gonna be? Drum roll. All right, Samantha. Oh,
I know. I was pointing at Anna. No, but like I knew I shouldn't have done that. I actually thought that you were going to call on me first, so that's why I was sitting back a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is great. So the first thing I'd like to do is thank Infoco for including me in this year's fellowship. I'd like to thank you, Wanda, and I'd like to thank the rest of the cohort. It's been an honor to be a part of our community and to be in exhibition with all of you. And also I'd like to thank the folks in the audience. Thank you for coming. Hi, Charles. Hi, Sasha. Hi, Susanna. I think I saw you. Maybe she left. And so thank you for coming to this talk. So, I've been listening to what remains out of practice and education. And, as a photographer who started off as, at first I was a documentary photographer, and then I moved into my current practice during and postgraduate school, which is still life and Tableau. I employ both of those practices to talk about my experience as a person, a citizen of diaspora, of multiple diasporas, who is also living within a diasporic space, which is New York City or the Bronx. I live and work in the Bronx. And I employ like a variety of different like methods to try to pinpoint, I guess, like different sort of, having like sort of like pulling from like family history, pulling from theory, pulling from political history, and pulling from my own experience, trying to I guess, like distill some thoughts that are uniquely mine. So this is a really super subjective practice, into these constructions. And so like what's remained over the course of like the past 20 years of me making photographs has been the attention to the photograph. I think like even though I might expand into other things, like I have this obsession with making objects, is like it always comes back to the image, no matter what happens, however that thought manifests itself. It starts with the photograph. But what's really in the practice of my current practice, it's essentially like me in a room and objects. And so what's stayed apart also is this idea of drilling down into like, what is it exactly am I doing, am I saying when I make an image? And often that, like, so for example, the image I'm working on now, which I will not be showing anybody, is like, it took me like 4 days to like, of just bullshit, like to kind of like get to this point where like, I'm like, oh, like, I think this is what I'm doing. And like, and that's great, but it's daunting. And I think like there's something akin to healing in that, where you have to sort of like wade through like the wreckage sometimes before you pinpoint the thing that it is you're trying to like articulate, or you're trying to heal from, or expose to the air. And at the end of the day, sometimes it is true that like, while healing does happen in a community, like it is like a very sort of like personal journey, subjective space, that each of our sort of like journeys are individual. And so anyway, so for me, like a lot of this like has to do with like just like putting names onto things, and just being kind of like asking that question. It's like, what am I doing when I do this right now? So
Yeah, you were just talking about, I'm just thinking about like, how many things have I made? I'm like, you know what I mean? I get away and I come back to it and I make something else. And then when that's not making any sense, and I'll just, think of and start tinkering with some other stuff, but somehow they're all threaded back together. And then, you were talking about, goes back to the image. And for me, it comes back to, scratching charcoal on the page, right? It comes back to my first love, from comics and telling stories, and slowing down enough to like really like fall in love with hair and how fabric falls, and this is that thing. But then there's all these other things that happen along with it, but always kind of coming back to that ground zero, that point. Dang, I would love, I want to ask so many questions, and I know we'll have a very short amount of time. So, all right, Ana, you're up. That's it. Te toca a ti. Everybody in the house, we're gonna picky English, picky pani sometimes. We're gonna the Spanglish to a minimum, I promise.
Well, I mean, lots of information that I feel has already been shared, trying to like keep it all like together and like add to it. I think my way of I'm a photographer, first of all. I think I studied biology first, but I'm a photographer in practice, and it was sort of questions from questioning documentary photography, because that's my background as well, and then actually not being very good at being in the moment, like fast all the opposite, like all these things I want to say, but like kind of like looking at colors and abstraction. So it's been kind of like questioning the medium, I guess, and then kind of like wanting to use it to explore more abstract ideas and like the unconscious and trauma and like family systems, very much from a scientific and psychological viewpoint. And how my hands kind of like collaging and like all this mixed media and wanting to push the image into more sculptural ways or forms, and always with an interest in collaboration, kind of like always wanting to open a channel, many times failing at it or not, but always trying to experiment with like involving others in that conversation, whether it's for sparking like things in their minds, but also wanting to hear what other people can add to the perspective, kind of. So yeah, that's my work.
I love that you're thinking, and I want to say that the bulk of the work that was exhibited in our show is photography in an expanded way, right? We're not just white frames, black border, or white frame, wow, white frames, black frames, 59-inch center. It wasn't we're having people stooping down, there's boxes, moving things around, there's like your work, right? You've got this crazy vinyl stuck on the wall, you're asking people to write, Pratya, you've got Xerox copies on top. It's just so exciting to see everybody with their toes, like trying to stick their toes out, trying to find the depths of the pool and realize they kind of don't reach. And that's what David Bowie, the musician, always said, that's where creativity begins. When you swim out just beyond, out in the water, just where you can no longer reach, that's where like the real search begins. And I love that you're talking about this in your practice. And it's funny because you're also come from this very scientific background, and you're moving with these experiments, but with the super subjective matter, right? It's you can't track some of the stuff they were talking about. It's all feelings and colors and just tactile. It's not it's not measurable by predictable or reliable metrics. So I find that very exciting that you are toggling between these two worlds and toggling between these two mindsets, but also this idea of healing. And this is something that we talked about a lot in our individual visit. We talked about the role of catharsis, and then kind of moving.
I guess it's also like that bridge between the rational and irrational. Not that I'm there yet, but like that's kind of like takes both parts of the brain in a way. Some are more blocked than the others, but kind of like creating that.
Yeah, and I love that your work also has that tension, right? Where you may or may not get as a layperson coming in, I'm Jane Q Public, I came off the street or whatever, and I don't get the resolution. You see that? You see how I got that image language right there? You see what I do with the pun? Resolution. That maybe I walk up to one work and this is a photo. This is what a photo is supposed to be. It has a foreground, it has a background, and it solves and answers all the questions expected of a photograph. And then there's boom, color, this shiny, touch here, like it pushes back against the viewer's expectation of what a photograph is supposed to be. And I really find that, I mean, across the board, I think the entire exhibition does that. Things on the floor, things are up high, like I really, so and I gotta say thank you to all of y'all for trusting me with going kind of, if I could go wilder, I would have. I would have. But I want to take this opportunity to jump right into, and we kind of touched upon it a little bit, but I want to ask the formal question about incorporating catharsis into our practice, if that is something, right? If it's, and I know we kind of touched upon it, or we could, I'm looking at the time, we can move into the second question since we kind of touched upon it. And the second question really is, do you envision your work specifically as a healing tool? And if so, for whom? And I can call a name, or you can jump in, or you can talk over each other, you can scrap it out. I don't know. Like, who wants to tackle that?
We're so shy today.
I know.
I'll have something to say about that.
Sure.
I always think that, like, to me, that question is like asking, like, who do you make the work for, or like,
yeah, and I'm not trying to ask that question because we can get into a fight over that. Depending.
Yeah, it goes back to like that question, like, you get asked in school about, like, do you think about your audience?
Right, and that's not how I wanted to ask that question.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I do believe in art, as a potential for healing, but I don't necessarily think about it when I'm making the work. At least not right away.
Well, thank you for saying that up front. I like that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's something that's more internal that I have to figure out. Like I have to solve something, something that I want to solve in myself first. And if it resonates with me, then it can resonate with other people. So like I don't necessarily, at least for me, like I don't think about the audience right away. But I do believe that if I do it right and if I stay genuine to like my curiosity, then it can resonate better with other people. And then that's where I think the potential for healing can happen.
Well, I mean, Pratya, your work particularly was addressing it was a direct personal hit to you and to your family. Like your piece that you show in this body of work that you're doing is a direct, like, this is what happened to my family. This is how this impacted. So was healing something that you were thinking about when you were making the work, or was it a social critique? Critiquing the institution that was imposing these and asking these sort of invasive questions. I'd love to hear because I'm butting that one directly against Ryan's, because he has his internal questions that he's hoping to tease out through the work and eventually present. But you're directly going like this to an institution, like you're literally holding a mirror to it. So I'd love to know your thoughts.
It's kind of direct for that project that it kind of pointing at to someone, but for me that just is a medium for me that I've been using that for a long time for my career. So it just allow me to question and to allow me to portray the reality that to like some anonymous people who have the power to decide whether my relationship is real or not. So I just questioning myself and want to show, honestly, at the beginning, I am not having any intention to show that work to anybody else, because I thought it's too personal. It's like anybody cares about that kind of thing, but I just keep doing it without any answer, any intention. It's kind of documenting at the first time before it forming to become the body of work. Yeah, and yeah, it's come from like frustration and the questioning, and when the times went by, it come to like, you know what, maybe the project it conveying some messages to someone, maybe they don't even know the process, what's going on behind the door, or from my experience during the process, that the marriage is kind of easy and it's allowed some people to stay here legally, but something is happening more than that, and again is questioning to some people who have the power, the authority, that they don't even know us at all, and we have such a short time or very intense situation to prove that we're real, and eventually we don't even know it's real or not. Or nobody, even you guys see my work, how you design. I would love to. I kind of have the question. I kind of have the statement in myself when I show that work. I would like to ask my viewer, do you know, when you see my work, you still think that we a real couple? If you are Dorothy, you guys could be anybody's. It's the same thing that you see that pictures. It's the same thing that authorities saw that picture, and eventually they say yes to us. So it's mixing in the way of curiosity and questioning and that kind of thing when I'm start doing that work. Yeah.
And the work is, it's interesting because what I see is the tension. Actually, I don't want to even use tension. Tension is such an art school, crit word. There's an abrasion, right? There's a scraping between the actual photos of you and your wife and the Xerox copies of you and your wife, which are just, right? It's just cut flat. All the beauty, all the intimacy it's just these two things really scrape against each other. And I feel like that is the critique of this moment, right? Where you have to prove, like, you know, and the thing is, the argument that can be further made with the work, and even to talk to your point of asking this question, do you believe that we are a real couple? I think you sold me, right? I bought it, you know, maybe you're an incredible actor, right? I don't know. And we're not going to say anything because we don't want INS bombing you anymore. But also like, maybe those folks that are in, you know, if this doesn't work, and you talk about this, someone else has the power. What if you're not a talented photographer that knows how to capture intimacy in a way that random guy in desk number 47 has to sign yes or no, and then, you know, your whole world is decimated because the evidence wasn't to this person's liking, and how incredibly subjective.
Yeah.
Right, using a subjective medium.
Yeah.
Something very concrete, right? And yeah.
At the beginning, honestly, when we need to go through that process, I just confused, like, how we prove to someone that we don't know that we're the real couple. We cannot just go there and knock the door and like, hey, you know what? We've been together for 5 years, and I know blah 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 blah, and we have just maybe a short time to do so, and we have to prove with a lot of evidence. One of the big evidence is the pictures. So what kind of pictures that we have to send and submit to someone that we don't have opportunity to talk to someone that see just a flat paper and the pictures, and it's like, they have the potential to be the real couple. So now we're gonna pass this paper to the next process until I get the interview. And the interview, we have only 10 minutes or even less than that, or even more than that, depending on the people who work there, to ask us some question. So all the thing is just come to like, I'm sorry, it's kind of funny. We when we went through that process, we have the really funny thought about me and my wife, like, should we send a sex tape? No, just a funny thought. Should we have to send a sex tape? Maybe it's a real proof. Should we do this, do that? You know, it's kind of thing. It's
right, and it could keep going up because it's limitless possibilities.
It kind of went beyond frustration sometime that we sit down together and like, what kind of pictures? Picture about us in the bed, this, that. So it's kind of up and down.
Yeah, you could send video you guys having an argument about who forgot to bring the milk or something stupid. Couples will have this argument. But anyway, I want to make sure that we keep the conversation moving along. Anybody else want to take a stab at this idea of, if you are envisioning your art as a healing tool, you know, if so, and how? I know, Ashley, I mean, I think that's the heart of the matter for your practice. Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% correct. It's funny because I was thinking about it, and initially, you know, deciding to go to art school and taking art seriously, photography seriously, I really wasn't conscious of it being a healing tool for me. I think this, you know, discussing whether or not the work, envisioning the work as a healing tool, I like to start with myself. I hope that's not selfish, but I feel like it eventually landed in a place where it was actually very, very healing for me, and just releasing a lot of emotional blockage, particularly the discussion of fatherhood and my relationship with my father. Once I started doing that, like, you know, having my friends spend time with their kids and just being a witness to that, it opened up a lot for me, and it allowed me to forgive. Just context, like, I don't really have a super close relationship with my dad, and growing up, definitely didn't have that either. So, you carry a lot of shit into your adulthood, and those are, one of the biggest things I found that I carried even well in my 20s. I'm like still feeling like that little kid again that just is experiencing this absence. And it allowed me to see not just my dad, but my family members, my parents as people, and they can only, I tend to say this a lot, like people can only use the tools they've been given. And that's one of the conversations that I hope to, or I actually have had with people when witnessing my work and it affecting them emotionally. Yeah, so it's definitely a healing tool for myself. It also allows me to have difficult conversations. Like it serves as a springboard to have a lot of conversations that I tend to get anxious about or retreat from having. You know, people see the work and, you know, the saying, the work speaks for itself, and it allows me to kind of enter this emotional space with someone particular, like maybe my dad or, you know, whoever, you know, I might have challenges with, or even with myself. And the beautiful thing about healing and discussion with photography is that, you know, if you're lucky enough, you can see and observe that on the other side. So I've definitely seen it actually emotionally, viscerally affect people in my community, and it's allowed me to have conversations with them they wouldn't probably have with me otherwise, or it might be difficult to kind of unlock that within them. But the work just kind of allows it just kind of allows all these conversations. People see it and they start telling me about their dad and their situation, and I'm like, you know, like we talk about, everyone has shit they're going through, and you know, I kind of saw a different side of like certain people that I personally know. Yeah, I mean, I feel for me, that's the biggest thing. And that's what drives me to keep making work, is that it's so healing for me. And it releases a lot of things that I like tend to, I guess, suppress might be the word.
What's interesting to me about your practice, and I didn't mean to step over you.
Okay.
But what I find and interesting hearing you say this, which I don't know if we talked about this before, but what is not present in this work, and I don't say this as a bad thing, what is not present is yearning, right? So, because you're talking about like solving or releasing some of this yearning, this kind of, we call it añoro, right, in Spanish, like when you kind of yearning or pining for something that was, you know, that you missed.
Yeah.
Sometimes that yearning shows up in the work like a void, like a deep absence, or you know, but that is not present in the work. Feels resolved, like this. There is no pining. It's just like, this is it, full stop. This is it. Like this is love. This is trust. This is gentility. This is, you know, and these are people of color. These are brown folks in nature, in a soft, gentle space. This is children being cradled by their parents or at play without the dangers, without all the other stuff, right? And so, and it's interesting because you're talking about from a place of yearning and absence, but, and I don't know if it could be argued that the work is escapist in some sort of way, right? Because you've created this sort of idyllic space, but it doesn't feel that way. You know, it feels resolved, like very loving without the ... And I've been talking in the last year or two as an art maker and as someone who's also an educator, and someone who has certainly had an axe that I've grinded publicly with my practice. The idea that we, as people of color, make or experience joy in spite of ... right? There's always the ... in spite of injustice, in spite of this, in spite of loss, in spite of and in spite of robs us of the full experience of the joy.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what I see when I saw your work. I did not feel that ellipsis at the end of it. And that's why I felt that I needed to tell you that the yearning or that pining also is the ... that like that when the shoe is going to drop. And it doesn't happen in your work. And I really find that so refreshing, and restful, right?
I like that word. I like restful. I like that a lot. Yeah, and
We tired out here, so
and I think I'm forgetting this book, but oh my God, I really hate that I'm forgetting this book right now. But it was a beautiful book written by I believe sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but they
pop quiz, everybody. Get your thinking hats on. Let's see if we could jump in and answer the question. Which book is this?
I mean, oh my God, they call it, basically they were kind of just describing like artists of color of all backgrounds and how we tend to get boxed in and make political work per se, but just the emotional, like just how taxing it also is to try to think of an entire history and what has gone wrong in our society or our community and try to like resolve it in art or in a work. Sorry, I'm forgetting everything. But I just found it interesting because yeah, we tend to naturally, people of color, Black people tend to naturally take on these super large subjects and get kind of just boxed in the political category or yeah. And I don't know, I just, for me, that's not the kind of work that I feel I want to make. And I like that you use the word restful because we don't, I feel like in our society, we don't get enough of that. And I like, I tend to create what I don't see, just point blank. So yeah, I definitely agree.
It feels like it. It feels like it. It feels like the air that is needed, like the deep breath after when you sit down, like when you sit on the couch. Ooh, like it feels like taking the load off emotionally. And I think that's why I talk about it as being a really beautiful counterbalance. It is romantic and indulgent and beautiful, right? And lighting is gorgeous. So I mean, it's all the things. It's all the things that we art students and scholars of contemporary practices are supposed to be like gritty or this or post post of the post and whatever the hell that means. And then to just kind of settle into, you know what? I just want to make a beautiful photograph about the thing that I haven't seen in a minute.
Yeah.
That's it. And what, right? And then like, who's your audience and why? Why do I gotta ask that question again, right? So, and with that, I feel like I want to go up to Samantha because we're out here talking about these images and the work that you're making is having a very different conversation. So, is your work a tool for healing? If so, how? Whatever. I'm gonna go right back to you, but like,
sure. Well, I think it's I'm trying to like sort of synthesize some of the especially the thought about like work as like a political tool and perhaps like also a healing tool. I think that like in some ways, like, so for me, like my work is like, as I mentioned before, like it's intensely subjective. Like it's coming from it is subjective, but then it is also broad in the sense that like inscribed on my body are like the histories of like multiple people, like, people who are communities of people who were brought over to the Caribbean either through enslavement or through indentured. And so, on my body, in my skin, in my hair, we have these histories, right? When I use objects that come from the Caribbean or from a diasporic space, like those histories are there. When I say histories, actually, like I mean the narratives of the past, as well as also like the continuing echoes of that past into the present. And so when I make the work, again, like rooted from my very subjective experience, like I understand that like it's also adding to, or hopefully adding to, like a part of a narrative of a place that is like widely misunderstood, yet that is also to quote somebody whose name I woefully have forgotten, like, like the crucible of the modern world. And so it is political on that level. I can't like escape from that, because like when I put my hand into an image, or when I use like my mom's like heirloom bracelet, like that politics that's still very much alive, that historical story, the historical politics that's still very much alive today comes into the image, And I think that for me, I'm, really fond of saying that like I make my work to answer questions that I have, not only, from my personal experience, but also like from the histories of like my family, right? So like, I when I make a still life, when I make like a self-portrait, if I insert myself into the image, I'm asking these questions that are deeply subjective. Like I make the work to answer questions about myself. And then by extension, that self becomes a narrative of like multiple groups of people over time. And I think that one of the things is like, so it becomes healing not like as a explicit tool for healing, but I do know that like sometimes like, and I'm always like really happy like when people like recognize themselves like in my work, right? On like whatever level. And I mean, the person actually who I end up, who I hear about this the most actually is my mom. Because like she shows up a lot in my pictures. And she recognizes herself. And I think that's something that's like really important to me. That's important that there is somebody out there, who can look at this and say like, wow, like, like this is perhaps like not exactly the story of my version of the story of this place, but like I can see the threads. But having said that, like I don't make the work for other people necessarily. I don't think about other people when I make the work. Like I ultimately make this work for myself. And like if at the end of the day, none of the pictures go out into the world, it's still like, to me, something that becomes like very valid, because again, like I'm asking these deep questions, or what I think of as like being very important questions about myself and my experience like at this time. And so yeah.
Right on. I mean, I had a very similar moment when I saw your work, and I certainly recognized the Caribbean. It jumped right out at me. But it unlike Ashley, yours, I certainly felt the questions, the yearning, I felt it. Like it was something that was very I had a very visceral response to it. Like it was just like, and I don't know, I'm going to hold it because I don't want to take up any time yammering on about that feeling, but I certainly felt it a lot. It called out to me, and the work compelled me. It held me. It held me, and it had me like asking, and that yearning was very strong. It was a very strong pull to this other place and to these other stories. And so, and that we're tethered to this patria, this homeland, whatever that is, that, and then also then you kind of, if you're of the diaspora, potentially not born of that place, then you're kind of twirling in the wind. You're like a kite tethered to something, but twirling with, where there's this like, you're pulled in one direction, you're pulled someplace else, but then you're yanked back. And so I certainly had that reaction to your practice. And I certainly,
if I may, like, I mean, like the work, like in its like sort of entirety, like, and as it's evolving, actually is like not necessarily talking about the return to like a homeland, but more like the idea that, having crossed these borders of like nationhood and self and all these other sort of, like into diaspora, and also being the product of multiple diasporas, and then crossing into a diasporic space, like what is it to be in diaspora? What is it to like make one's home there? And so like the work isn't about necessarily a yearning for like the idea of like returning to a mythical homeland. I mean, like I come from like two separate islands, and so like which place am I returning? And the only sort of like home space that I can really talk about is this diasporic home space. Like I live in the Bronx, I was raised in the tri-state area. And so there is like this kind of acknowledgement in some ways that like for many of us who are, I was born in Jamaica, but there's more Jamaicans outside of Jamaica than there are in Jamaica. And so when we're talking about like a lot of Caribbean culture, we actually are talking about a diasporic culture, and we're talking about, and so I'm acknowledging that on some, but I'm acknowledging it through myself, that, ultimately, and the only place that I can sort of like call home, if you will, is this flux, the flux of diaspora. And what does that look like? You know, and in my pictures, what I try to do is, you know, as I said, like coming from sort of like these multiple like identities, not only of like sort of nation statehood, but also like racial identities, and apart from like other sort of like levels, is to try to like essentially create this space where like all of that mash could be together in the image. And that's what leads to like these multi-layered compositions that are slightly chaotic. That, you know, because it's important to try to, you know, have like that multiplicity that diaspora really means, like in those images and each one of those pictures. And so I think it's a different conversation about immigration than what Americans normally have, you know, and you know, and I guess like, you know, again, like I don't necessarily like make work to like with the hope of a viewer trying to like expand their ideas of anything. But I mean, like I do think that like, you know, the more I talk about it is the more I realize that like this is a conversation that also like not a lot of people have about immigration. That, you know, the communities that are in New York City, that are in the tri-state area, like we're not yearning for anything. Perhaps like we are actually just where we are. So.
Yeah, and I think that's something that also spoke to me too, being born and raised in New York City of Puerto Rico, right? And that's what I mean about that. This, you know, I'm about to go to Puerto Rico in 5 days' time, and I'm not home there, and yet I am home there. And so like it's this home-ish, and you know, it's kind of romantic, kind of tragic, kind of all these other things. And then I'm in Virginia, I was in Florida, and then what is home when by nature of genetics and how molecules are arranged and, you know, DNA strands and all this other stuff, you may or may not be accepted into this home, this land. And then you put me in the Bronx, for better or worse, I'm home. You know what I mean? And so I completely get, and that's that thing that was the tether, that pull that I felt. So I definitely want to make sure that I touch on Tanya, and I touch on Ana. Who wants this? Who wants some of this?
I can talk a little bit about how I was, I guess this question to me, sort of, I think about in the context of like street photography, and the kind of photographing of strangers, or especially a lot, you know, the news photography that I was doing, or like working in refugee camps, and like, you know, meeting people sometimes at like the worst, you know, point in their life. So, and, you know, dealing with people that are undergoing sometimes pretty traumatic situations. You know, a lot of times I'd be like the first person to ask people like, how are you holding up? So there, you know, there was a lot of education I think that I did for myself on just like how to best support people. But that idea of also of like slowing down and seeing the potential for this kind of photography to be a sort of social work, and like kind of questioning how I can ground it in my values, and like trying to imagine a practice that could allow for space in an interaction to be more of an exchange, to be more collaborative, to be more, you know, to be emancipatory ultimately for both of us. And so like, I think a lot of my practice is really just trying to learn how to be like really, really present and open and vulnerable. So even if I am just like doing street photography, like how to walk meditatively and like pay attention to light and like get lost in that. But then also just like be really open to meet and be touched by other people, strangers that I meet, you know, and just like how to show up in the world physically and emotionally in a really grounded, vulnerable way, so that, you know, I can open myself to like intimate experiences with people to try to find some sort of emotional truth to say together. Like that's the ultimate idea for me in like a portrait, you know, for someone to look really self-possessed and for it to have been a slow process and for like them to be as much part of that, the owner of that photograph in a way, you know. So that's kind of how I was thinking about, obviously, like doing news photography gets into the whole like, you know, audience thing again. But I think I just have tried to avoid that conversation now.
I think you have to, right? I think, you know, as art makers, you have to. If you are thinking about the audience, then let's just go make t-shirts. You know, let's make some t-shirts and mugs and maybe get a laser printer and laser cutter. I don't know, whatever. Like, you know what I mean? That's not, we're not in that, we're not really making stuff. We shouldn't be thinking so much about what's going to happen once the work leaves the studio. If, you know, if you're doing it right, you're digging deeper, you're investigating, right? So I want to ask you, because it's so intimate, like, and, you know, what do you do? What do you do either to gird yourself from getting too close, or how do you nurture yourself if your subject matter is like super intense?
I don't think I did for a very long time. I think there's a lot of like freelance journalists out there that are just really like hurting themselves and potentially hurting a lot of other people. But you know, yeah, I mean, definitely participating in like the community aspects of like just education, really training, because it just requires training on like there are ways to support people that are undergoing, you know, traumatic situations. So, and then for me, like, I mean, I don't know if I do it that well, but like, yeah, I try to do my own self-care practices, I guess, to, you know, I don't know, maybe my lack of response here is actually more telling.
But actually, that's a really great segue to Ana, because I know Ana's work is all about like having this conversation, a direct conversation with healing, trauma, and then what happens next. So I definitely want to pass the baton over to you, Ana, and this direct connection to like trauma and healing in the work.
Yeah. I mean, for the same reason that it's directly connected, I guess I have a critical point of view to using. I mean, I agree with everything that everyone was saying about what I seem to understand was kind of like this need to have this artifact, like this lens, this shield, whatever it is, to kind of like view the world and connect with it more. You know, we're all like ADHD and like really, I feel like we have general photographer traits when it comes to, but at the same time, the camera is objectifying, you know, it is like there's not the same hierarchy between the photographer and the subject. Like all those things are real. And if we come to trauma, like it's such a fine line between healing and re-victimizing. It's such a fine line between I don't know, vulnerability or being a patient with oneself, or kind of like being manipulative. Like there's so many lines, and I feel like it's very delicate to maneuver. There's no right answers, unfortunately. You know, like I don't think there's a book, even though we can educate. I do agree with that part. We need to educate ourselves, but there is a point, there's a space for not knowing what's going to happen. Like there's a risk in the moment that you're taking these photos, and when you're touching things of trauma, that, you know, it's a vulnerable point. And for the same reason that it's a vulnerable space, like it's tricky. But all that to say that I think the healing happens in like the creation of community, when you speak to other people that you're photographing, your practice of how do you go around it, consent, meeting other people, getting to know their story. So it's like all those interactions that are a great part of the healing, but at the end, perhaps the object or the image itself is more like a self-reflection point. So just to say that, I mean, definitely it's holistic. Like you also need psychology, medication, whatever. Like it's not going to be just the photo that's going to do the healing.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting because when we were talking about, I would like to know if you could actually going into, and I didn't bring my notes from our initial conversation, but talk about where the work is now and the springboard into that next level of the catharsis. Because I kind of was deliberately hoping that I can get to you last because you were making a jump in your work into the future.
Yeah, it's my first, so I only do long-term projects so far. The first one was a very documentary, and then this one was kind of like finding myself as an artist. So the language has really changed. It happened to be color right now. I don't know if I'll stick to color. That's what I did for this one. And it started very much like the first images are very anxiety driven and like, like it's really a reflection of the moment. And I would even say my approach was riskier at the beginning because I didn't have a procedure. I didn't know. Now that it's the third year into it, I'm like, I've set all these parameters of how I want to work, what I'm looking at, and I've changed. So I'm also now feeling lighter and more abstract and like trying to get less textile, less visceral and like, so yeah, as my feelings change, like what I want to represent has been changing as well.
So with that, thank you so much for saying that, because I mean, I know the third question that I had listed is about the platforms that you believe are effective in sharing a message. But now in this conversation, I don't know if I want to, I don't know. So I would love to know, because we're almost at that point, we'd like to open up the floor to our amazing attendees. I'm sure they have questions to ask. So what's next? What's next? Where do we go from here? Anybody have any interesting projects, or has this been a springboard? This particular work that you've shown here, is your work kind of continuing in the same thread? And we don't have to do everybody in the room. If you don't really feel like you want to share, it's fine. But if you're really excited about the direction the work is going in, I'd love for you to kind of, if you'd like to share it, that'd be awesome.
I'm actually in residence right now in Rochester.
Yeah. Oh, what residency?
Visual studies workshop.
Holler.
Yeah, it's really great.
How long are you up there for?
I'm leaving on the 17th, so I'm here until the 16th, with the exception of like 1 week where I'm going to be gone. But yeah, no, I'm here. I'm practicing being loose and just like kind of like making, like letting I'm not in my usual sort of like space, obviously, and so like kind of like trying to use like that sense of displacement to make some pictures that have been on the back burner. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love our residency time is always so great, because you go in, you swear you have it all figured out, and then something happens and then the work completely shifts, and then all of a sudden now you have a new trajectory of work.
Yeah,
that's so exciting. Love residency time. God, that's so fantastic. Anybody else got anything cooking?
About myself, because basically my personal project is just anything is around me. It's about my life. So from last year, I'm so introvert. It's like when I'm doing the project, I dive into myself deeper and deeper. And I realized that I'm losing my ability to connecting to the other people around. So from last year, I tried to create another work that I need to take myself out there to see a new people. So, and it's keep doing that since last September. So that is kind of new project that's been going on, and it's a lot of challenge that I facing right now. But it's fun, they have challenging stuff. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'd love to see how that lays itself out. That's exciting. I had a dear friend of mine, who was an incredible introvert. And especially, so her birthday month was the month of October. Her name was Heather. And her birthday month was October. And every day in the month of October, she forced herself to find a different cupcake in the city to
That's
make
amazing.
sure that she went out into the world, that she didn't dive deep into her books and just kind of hide or whatever. And so she every day, I don't know how she didn't turn into like, if it were me eating a cupcake a day for a month, it'd be a hot mess. But no, but that sounds exciting. I can't wait to see what you're up to, what happens with Pratya out in the world. Anybody else got anything going?
I think for me right now, I've been thinking a lot about returning to, with an undergrad, I did make a lot of video work as well, which I never really like publicly put out there, but I kind of miss making video work because for me, like, I love photography, but sometimes it feels limiting in what I can express and say. And I just find the idea of kind of trying to translate the subject that I've been sticking with into a more moving image format. So, returning to making video work and, thinking about eventually one day a short film, particularly around many things, but just, the idea of what I've already been working on. Yeah, that's for me, like, where I'm at right now. It's a slow departure from photography.
So guess what? We got questions. So there is one question that has come in from our amazing viewers. The question is, in photography, do you find that there's a particular boundary that you enjoy crossing in your work?
Oh my God. Yeah. I actually yes, I enjoy, these days, especially just like, I don't know, I kind of just like to kind of like push the work to the point where it doesn't really make a lot of sense anymore. And then something happens at that point. But like, I guess like the boundary is just like trying to, I don't know, just the more incoherent it gets, usually like I find that to be like a really, really good place. And then I have to resolve that in some sort of way. And like, that's really, I find that to be like, just like a place, like when the work gets more chaotic. So in other words, like sometimes in still life, I think like, especially in current trends, like there's this idea of like having a very legible still life, or just, just like, I think in photography in general, like there seems to be this like, tendency towards like hyperlegibility of images. And I enjoy not making that. And
nice.
Yeah, that's essentially it. Yeah.
So I think, Ana, I think that kind of speaks to your practice as well, like going against hyperlegibility.
I don't know. I do love to, I love to break rules all the time, like flowing a little. Yeah.
I mean, well, so for those of you who don't know more about her work, y'all need to get out there and go see the show and stop playing games and go see it in person. And there's another question. Do you have any artists out there? Do you have any archives or artists that y'all connect to or that you would recommend for audiences?
I think that's like, that really sort of depends on like what people are interested in looking at. But, I would say like one of the things is, actually someone who I'm thinking about a lot is like Sarah Palmer, who is a photographer who does a lot of rephotographing, like photographing, rephotographing, scanning. Then there's like Sarah Swinar. So there's the two Sarahs who like live in my head. I know Sarah Palmer. We teach together, and then Sarah Swinar is someone who I don't know, but like, but this kind of like accretion of stuff that happens in their work, I think is like really fascinating. And I think like, if I may, I think like one of the things, like if you're interested in like, learning about like different types of photography, I mean, like there's the usual kind of like the peregrinations through the interwebs, so it's like lens scratch, lens culture, the other things. And then But more importantly, like, you know, if you're in New York City, download an app like Seesaw or get on the Art Hap newsletter. And, you know, like there are like, you know, Art Hap every week, for example, will send out a list, a spreadsheet of like all the openings that are happening across the city, and like just go and see work, you know, and this way, like you end up building your own archive of work that you pull from, that you know, if you're anything like me, you'll probably end up like forgetting like a ton of names, but you'll remember the work. And you'll remember like exactly like how maybe certain work makes you feel, or like any kind of technique that you want to use. I think the important thing is just like to sort of like to build up your own archive. And then my last thing is actually like to not really underestimate public archives, like in libraries, right? Like libraries are essential, you know, like places like the Library of Congress, especially if you're doing archival work, you know, they have a lot, right? And, you know, yeah, just check those places out as well.
What is the city resource that you mentioned?
So like, well, there's the app, like there's Seesaw. It's like the game, like the
Yeah,
child.
Seesaw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
check Seesaw.
Yeah,
Now
Seesaw, yeah. But actually the one that's more comprehensive is ARTHAP, ARTHAP. And like right now, like that just exists as like a newsletter and like a Google map. But it's like every week. Her name is like Alex. Like, and like I met her the other day and I literally like I've never like fanned out on somebody so hard. I was just like, wow. Like, I mean, so she like, it's like literally like this, like every week, 50 openings. Yes, thank you, Oscar, for putting that in the chat. It's like really, really great. And it's like, you know, it's cross discipline. So it's like, you know, but it's like literally every opening in the city. And that is a really, really good resource just to find out like what's going on, but this is how you build up your own resources as individual artists.
I could add one more thing that's kind of my behavior, especially in New York City. I would love to stop by like at least once a month at any bookstore. We have amazing bookstore in New York City, and you don't need to pay a damn basically. But you could buy it, it's great. You support the artists that buy a lot of books, but you go there, you see the work, you see the print strand, they have a shitload of photo books. It's amazing. And the other one I would suggest is Dashwood. I'm not sure you guys know that bookstore. Dashwood is amazing collection of the photo books. Some is very hard to find, or have alternative photo book from Japan, from another country, or even old book. So I think that's a good resource too. It's don't be shy. I know sometimes I'm shy. I don't have any money to buy this, but I gonna pop up like 5 minutes to like go through. I'm like, oh my god, it's good, but okay, thank you, I'm leaving. Yeah, so that is a good thing that basically that we could do in New York City. I think like you could update yourself about that too. You see the print sometimes different than you see on Instagram or you know, like on the screen. I love to touch the paper. I still love to see sometimes it different paper, and even how they decide for the book is really, you know, it's amazing. So maybe that's another thing that you should check it out if you live in New York City. Yeah.
So I have a question also for, and this is like you know, for the photographer out there who is very talented, but kind of thinking about taking the step into photography as art making, as opposed to photography as a way to make a living, right? You know, what do you have any words of advice, encouragement, leap of faith, pep talk? Do you have anything that you could mention to someone? Because I feel like that's something that's very hard to make the transition from commercial to making more studio practice-based photography. Any words of wisdom?
I can go for it because I do both for a while. So I've been commercial photographer over 10 years, basically. Before I started doing my personal work, for sure, doing commercial, there's pay my bills, but in some certain point, I mean, personally, I become the robot a little bit. That I go out there, I talk to the client, I come back to plan the shoot, go back and shoot, and kind of satisfy my client, get the money. And depend on some people live, because I know some photographer, they adapt their own style or their own project to become the commercial work. That's amazing. That is ideal. That, oh my God, the client see my personal work and like, hey, PJ, Pratya, I would like to get my commercial work as your personal work. That is the best. But sometimes you couldn't reach that point. Okay. It's a little hard that I experience myself I work for the client for like 3 days, and how I split my mind to put that the other myself down. Like, okay, the other project had to stop right now. So the other project go out there and doing my personal work. The thing that is to do that, it kind of take some energy and power and mentally for me, because that's your life too. So I don't know I don't have any wisdom word to do so, but I think for me, I keep practicing and forcing yourself. I'm so tired. I'm shooting commercial. I'm like, oh my God, I'm draining. I'm drowning to the work, whatever. I have to go back to re-editing the work for like 1,000 pictures. But I discipline myself. All right. If I'm not too tired, I'm not so exhausted, I need to go out there to do something about myself. Put the other myself down. If you could, but I know it's not that easy. I saying it sounds easy, but it's not, believe me. But keep doing that. If you're so tired, you could slow down. It's fine. I know the food on the table is so important. You need to bring it up. Do that. Nothing wrong with it. And when you have the energy, you get myself back again. Go out there. Don't forget to satisfy yourself to do something about your own once in a while. That it kind of fire yourself a little bit, that, oh my God, it's great. I don't need to follow anybody. I'm following myself, following my voice. So just try it, just keeping it. And I know frustration a lot during the way to do so, but yeah, just keep it a try. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you said satisfy yourself, right? That's something that's I think that as art makers, especially art makers that are trained to work for the client, illustrators, commercial photographers, documentary photographers, like you're trained to think about the client and sublimate that personal narrative. But this idea of satisfying yourself is really important, right? That's the thing, that's the muse that's nagging you in the middle of the night, that's bugging you while you're trying to have your coffee and you're trying to edit these stupid wedding pictures that you took so that you can pay your bills or whatever it is. But so that then you can create that space to satisfy yourself, to do the experimental things, to take those photographs that you think nobody else is going to want to see. And that's really important at the end of the day. That little voice inside, you have to kind of nourish it and keep that creative fire alive. I'm gonna check and see, does anybody else have any words of wisdom for any photographers out there? I know that we also have some opportunities because we have next year's Enfoco, right? Application is going to be right around the corner. I think that we need to save a minute or two for words from our fearless leader, Danny Peralta. But if anybody else has any other little pearls of wisdom before I pass the baton over to Danny.
So if you so I will say when I first started and up until recently, I made a really conscious decision to not do commercial work. And I've worked as a scanner, an IT person. I'm currently a teacher, and I've done other random things as well. And the idea of it being that what you need to put food on the table is just a job, right? You just show up. I mean, I say this, it's when I teach in the semester, I give my 100% to my students, so I'm not dialing it in, right? But I really promise you that. But ideally, it's it's a job that either nourishes your practice or it is separate from your practice, right? And so you go to your day job and then you go and you do your work, right? And and that's what it is, and so the thing that you have to protect at all costs, in my opinion, is your work, is the art that you're making, right? And so if you find that you're in a position, in a job or in a situation where more is like leaching out of your practice than it is being put into it, like that's a problem, right? It's like, so like whatever it is you do, it's like flip burgers, right? Be a gardener. You know, I don't know, build canvases for somebody. Like I know people who like literally actually do all of those things, and they have like their practice, and their practice is the thing, right? Like that is their actual work. And like actually, and so like for me, it's you know, teaching is something that feeds my practice more than it takes away, right? And so that's why I teach. And so I think that's like, it's really important to like, you know, you don't have to necessarily be, I mean, again, it's entirely possible for you to like work construction, which is a very decent paying job, plus it's union, like, and also be a photographer. Like one doesn't take away from the other. But what like this day job does is that it buys you your film, it gets you your film process, right? It does all these things. And it also, more importantly, gives you the mental space, the energy to like, to devote to your work when you're off the clock, right? And I think that's just like really important. Like whatever it takes to keep your work going is what you have to do.
Right on, right on. And certainly doing it in a way that doing whatever that work is that you're not, like you said, that's not going to take away or drain your battery to the point that you can't create, right? I teach, I teach, and it certainly buys me my paper, and it provides my space. And I do give my students the best of me. But I also make sure that I don't give the rest of me to the studio, or rather, maybe I do give the rest of me, but I try to save a little. I think, especially if you've been doing this for a while, learning how to pace yourself so that you have a reserve tank. But we are at 7:29. I am gonna bring, and thank you so much, panelists. Y'all are dope. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all the people that are listening and that have hung out and listened to my crazy self this whole time. I want to introduce Dani Peralta, who is the executive director here at Enfoco. And so, Dani, take it away, sir.
Thank you, Wanda. This was amazing. I just want to take the time before we hang up to thank a bunch of folks. Again, this would not be possible without the efforts of folks like Bill, our president, and the board of directors here at Enfoco. Again, I want to give a huge shout out to you, Wanda. Thank you for holding this thing down. Everybody give a big round of applause, right? I know you guys are clapping at home for the job Wanda did here and leading up to this event. Thank you, Wanda. It's been a real honor working with you. And again, I want to give a shout out to all of our artists. You guys, again, inspiring, defying all the odds, and creating good work, regardless of what that is. So thank you for the insight. And I also want to give a shout out to the other artists that were not here today, as well as our new media artists that also won some fellowships this year. I want to also invite you all next Thursday in the evening around 6 o'clock, Create Hub, come check us out. We're going to have the final reception for this particular show. Come show some love, meet the artists, sip some wine with us, charcuterie boards and all that good stuff. Come through, good time. This is at Create Hub, 15 Canal Place. Come out. And also on Tuesday, similarly,
I want to see a picture of the charcuterie board. I want to see it. If
it's official, Wanda inspired. Wanda inspired. We're gonna have extra.
I want to see Western beef bags and mass. You hear me?
Extra cornichon just for you, Wanda. But that's at Create Hub. Tuesday also, come out. We're gonna be there in the evening time. We're gonna be talking about the new Nueva Luz Study Center Commission Fund that we have. Again, another opportunity for artists to earn funding as well as exhibition and mentorship opportunities. The archive. I want to give a shout out to the folks down at the center on 13th Street as well. We have an amazing exhibit there. We're showing 7 artists there as well. Check that out. It's called Divine Queerness. Again, another amazing show put on by our curators. A shout out to those folks. And if you haven't already, you have to sign on. You have to get your hands on not only an experience, what I call it, but the issue that carries this particular body of work, which is Nueva Luz. Please subscribe to that. Go to our website, enfoco.org. Check out Nueva Luz. There's 76 or 77 issues in there. The archive is amazing. Subscribe. It's one of a kind. Nothing like it. The only repository of its kind in the planet, maybe the galaxy. And please, again, continue to support us. Check out the new Nueva Luz Study Center. It's also opening up very soon. And again, it's all in honor of the legacy of the photographers and the communities that we work with. And again, it's a real honor and a pleasure to represent you guys. I wanted to give a huge shout out to you guys and wish you guys a good summer. Please check us out at focal.org. Peace, everybody. Thank you.
Felicidades, everyone.
Igual, igual. Awesome job. Thank you for that.